this is Davison Yon, and I am here presenting to you music theory, and this is hopefully going to be a really informative YouTube mini-series to anyone that's interested in music, or music theory, or just learning how to write music. I'll kind of go to the next slide here, and I'll talk to you a little bit about myself before I really talk about what we're going to be discussing in this mini-series on YouTube. But first, for myself, again, my name is Davison Yon, and we have this cool little pen tool, so I'll kind of start using it. So my name is Davison Yon. I am a composer, an educator in training, and I am a violinist. I have a few of these instruments listed below down here. I have experience playing all these instruments just because of my education background. And let's keep going here. I studied for about a year at the Berklee College of Music, and then I transferred to Cleveland State University up here in Cleveland, Ohio. Love Cleveland. And more about me specifically, I am studying music composition and music education. Music composition wise, I'm focusing more on the film and video game aspect of music, and by now I have over 100 original compositions ranging from small ensemble pieces, solos, to full orchestral music. So I have a pretty diverse experience writing for all types of different instruments, and I have had an extensive background of theory and orchestration, and I feel like this series might be a little awkward because I really am not the best speaking by myself. So I hope that you guys don't get too bored. But yeah, so I study music composition and music education, and on the education side of things, I am focusing more on string development. So if you were ever in a high school or middle school, or sometimes even in elementary school, and you saw kids with like violins, violas, cellos, basses, I'm hoping to teach students string instruments, because that's just my preference. And so let's get on to what this series is going to be about: music theory, and more importantly, what exactly is music theory? Well, music theory, when we talk about music theory, we're not talking about how to actually compose music specifically, but we're more focusing on how composers wrote music, and we'll discuss, techniques they use to write their music. But this isn't going to be like, I'm going to teach you how to write your magnum opus or something like that. That's not, you can take anything you learned here to do that, but we're not going to be specifically focusing on, creating a piece of music. We might at some point, but that's a little bit beyond the scope, at least for now. I think maybe in the future we might work on something like that. I don't know. This is the pilot episode, and I already feel like it's going down the hill. So if you guys like this, just let me know. But music theory also it gives us an understanding of the workings of harmony and form, and that's important. I'll talk about what harmony and form is later on in the mini series. But you may have noticed on this slide that there's a few terms that are not highlighted, they're bold, and these are important terms. So just kind of keep them on the back burner right now. I haven't really defined anything for you except for what music theory is. Like, I haven't defined harmony or form, but kind of keep those words in your database of words that you should know and that you will learn. I will teach you what these words mean. But back to music theory. Music theory does give us a way to explain music in an agreed upon language that other musicians and composers understand. So why that is important is when you're talking to someone about music and they're a musician or a composer, it's really a lot more helpful to talk about, specific things other than like, oh, I liked that this was loud here and soft there, or I really liked how this song made me feel. Those are great ways to talk about music, but music theory gives us a diverse catalog of musical terms we can use to describe music. And these terms, all musicians and composers should understand what they mean, and they'll understand exactly what you're talking about. So when you start talking about tonic and dominant, musicians will automatically know you're talking about the 1 and 5 chord and the minor or major mode. But yeah, so let's get back on to this. I want to discuss a little bit about some of the objectives that I have for this class, and more specifically, a lesson objective that's specific to the lesson today. During the lifespan of this YouTube mini-series, we're going to have a couple of course objectives. I'll introduce these course objectives in the slideshow presentation like so. And so you can see just for this is the first objective. And I mentioned that I want the students to be able to compose, it's an important word, compose a simple 4-bar melody in treble clef and transcribe it to alto clef and bass clef. So I did notice just now, I mentioned the alto clef. That is an important clef, but I decided when I was working on these slides the other day that I'm not going to be discussing alto clef this soon. But that is something that we'll talk about, but I'm going to be primarily focusing on the treble clef and the bass clef, which we will learn about actually in this lesson today. And the lesson objective for today, for this little lesson today, is I'm hoping that students will be able to identify basic components of the staff, which is an important term, and students will be able to develop the basic understandings of how the treble and the bass clef function. So it's more than just knowing, this is a treble clef, this is a bass clef. I want you to be able to understand, what is a clef, and I want you to understand where notes exist on a clef and stuff like that. So let's continue on. So this is something called the staff right here. This picture, I have my little pen tool and we'll kind of discuss the components as they come up. But in staff, the staff is where all the musical language is located. So if you're reading a book, all those words make a sentence. Well, the staff contains all this information that helps musicians understand what a composer wants to be played. So there's a couple of key components, and I have them listed here on the side. The first one we'll go over is something called lines and spaces. So what you see right here, that looks like a circle, that is called a note. And you see that there's this line, try and draw a straight line there, that goes through this note. So all these lines are quite literally called lines. And these exist both on the staff and off the staff. So we just take a little tour over here. You see that there's more lines down here. What's special about these lines is that they are not on the staff. They are off the staff. They are below the staff. And we call these lines ledger lines because notes, they exist here on the staff, but sometimes when you hear really high notes or really low notes, they might be a couple of ledger lines up or even a couple of ledger lines below. So we talked about lines and spaces. The next big thing that you'll notice on the staff is called a clef. Now this right here is called the treble clef. I don't have this written down, but we'll talk about the treble clef momentarily. But this is the treble clef. Another component you need to know about the clef, another major component you need to know about the staff is something called the time signature. So music exists, but we need a way to be able to stay together when we're playing with each other and kind of keep a steady tempo. And how we do that is we divide everything we play into subdivisions, and we do that with time signatures. We're not going to talk about time signatures in this video today, but time signatures are a very complex subject. I mean, they're not that complex, but there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to discuss about how they work and sometimes when you might not see them. But moving forward, this goes in relation to side time signatures is something called the bar line. So this vertical line that you see here, and even here, even though this is what we call a final bar line, and it has a thicker side here and a thinner side there. These bar lines is how we divide this division of time evenly. So I'm going to talk about time signature, like I said, later on, but just to quickly explain this, 4/4 simply means that we're going to have something called beats, and those are actually quarter notes, but I'll describe them as beats here. There are 4 beats in this measure. This is called a measure. We'll talk to that in a second. And then this measure has 4 beats as well. So this line simply says, hey, look, this right here is going to be the first 4 beats. This is going to be the second 4 beats. And this is going to be the third 4 beats. And usually in music, I don't have it listed here. You'll see numbers. Occasionally you'll see 1, 2, 3. There's also something we call measured numbers, and that just helps musicians know where they are in the music. The next thing we want to talk about that I thought was a major component of the staff is something called the key signature. Key signature, and that is this little thing right here. No, that is not called a hashtag. In music, that is called a sharp sign. Key signatures let musicians know how certain notes are played, and just to briefly talk about it right here, this sharp sign lets us know that all the Fs, unless otherwise notated, have to be played sharp. And so that's the basic major components of the staff. There are 5 of them listed here. One thing I noticed that's not listed here, and I'm going to be using the term a lot, is something called measure. So I'm using my mouse, so hopefully you can read this, M-E-A-S-U-R-E, measure. And a measure is simply this. So there's 4 beats in this first little section here before the bar line. Anything contained within a bar line is called a measure. So all this is a measure, all this is a measure, and here's another bar line, and here's the ending bar line for this. This is all called a measure. So there's really 6 major components of the staff, but the 5 I want you to remember include the lines and spaces, the clef, the time signature, bar lines, and the key signature. So let's continue on. Here I have an example of music that's written on the grand staff. And you've probably heard this piece before. I don't have an audio sample with me, but I'll definitely link one in the description of the video. But this is Für Elise, and it is written by Beethoven. He is a composer, and he was one of the most influential composers of the 1800s. I mentioned, just as an aside, you don't really need to know this, but this is called, I can't pronounce it in German, but it's WOO59, and that means works without opus numbers. We don't do it so much today, but anytime you hear like opus 1 or opus 2, that's just a way that we catalog music for each composer. And in this case, Für Elise didn't have an opus number, so we didn't know what order it came in. So we came up with this agreed upon system of works without opus numbers, so that when musicians talk about WOO59, we know they're talking about Für Elise. So what's special about this music is a new term for you. It's called the grand or the great staff. And what the grand staff is, it's a 2-bar staff. So if you want to look at the image here, you already notice you have a staff here, but now you have a staff down here, and they are conjoined together by something called middle C. We'll talk about that in a minute, but how they're joined together and how you know they're joined together is you have a bar line here, and you notice that it's connecting both of these. And then you also have this bracket here at the beginning of the system, and it's joining these 2 bar lines together. So we know for certain that this is a grand staff. So I want you to take a minute and notice the time signature, the key signature, bar lines, notes and spaces, and the clef of this music. You might not know specifically the clef names, but I want to see if you guys can kind of figure out where they are. Take a second here and see if you can find them. All right, so the time signature is, you might not know what it means. We pronounce it 3, but here's where the time signature is located. The next thing we are looking for is the key signature. Key signature, it's actually right here. This is kind of a trick question because there is no, if we go back to that previous slide, you see we have this sharp sign right here, and that's our key signature, but here there is no sharp sign. Do not let this confuse you. This is indeed still a key signature, especially in Beethoven's music. He most definitely wrote in key signatures. Next thing we want to talk about are bar lines. I kind of already talked about this, but these vertical lines that I have highlighted here, those are called the bar lines. And next we want to look at notes, lines, and spaces. You can already see that there's already a lot of notes on here, but this is a note, that's a note, that's a note, that's a note, that's a note, that is a note, that is a note, and so on. And then on this staff we have, this is a note, that's a note, and that is a note. You may see these strange symbols right here, and here, 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 and even here. Those are what we call rest. I haven't talked about those just yet, and we will most definitely talk about those. They are a little bit beyond the scope of these basics I want to talk about for today, but just know that they exist and they are called rests. In the next video, I will probably be talking about rests. Oh, and the last thing here is clefs. There's two clefs here. There's this clef and there's this clef. So you may be wondering, what is that clef and what is that clef? Well, we have this handy dandy slide right here. Let me just go ahead and open up all the information here. These two clefs are called the treble clef and the bass clef. They are the two most commonly used clefs in all of music, the treble clef and the bass clef. So when we talk about music, the first thing we want to talk about and make sure you understand is something called, well, what I call the musical alphabet. I'm pretty sure there's another way of saying this. I mean, you could probably say scale, but I don't want to use the term scale just yet because it might confuse you later on. But in music, there are 7 specific notes, and each note can be sharp or flat. There are 7 primary note names, and they always repeat on the 8th space. So to help you understand this, if you know your alphabet, which you should by now, you just go in order, and it goes C, D, E, F, G, but every time after G, we stop, and we start back over at A. So then now we go A, B, C. So if we count this, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different notes. Once we get to the 8th, it repeats the first note that we started with. And this sequence can start anywhere in the musical alphabet, but you just want to keep going in order until you get to G, and then you're going to run a restart at A. So in this example, I started on D. The next note is an E. After E comes F. After F comes G. After G comes H. No. A. Remember, A always comes after G, and G always comes before A. After A, we go to B, and we go to C, and now we are on the 8th space, which is a D, which is just a repeat of this first note here. And just to prove this point, I haven't talked about this little image here, but I'll use it right now for an example. We have the letter A here, so if we go up 8, we should get 8 notes, we will get to another A. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the treble clef, we call it the G clef, and there's a specific reason why we call it the G clef. I want to see if we can zoom in a little bit. Yes, so this is good. So I don't have my pen anymore, I don't think. But why we call this the G clef is because if you look at the little hand that I have here for my cursor, you can see that the clef itself circles around this line right here. And that line in the treble clef is called the G line. Now, the bass clef, on the other hand, is called the F clef. And why is it called the F clef, you may ask? Well, if you see these two dots right here, there's a dot above this line and a dot below this line. These two dots are encircling or enclosing the F line. And you'll also notice that the clef is drawn with a circle right on F. So that is why we call the bass clef the F clef. So in music, when you see these notes or on the staff here, each note has a specific letter name, so we know exactly what pitch to play on in your instrument. And that is a term you should know, and it's not included in this presentation, is pitch. And we will talk about pitch almost all the time in subsequent videos. And I will define that later on, but just know that's how you spell pitch. But anyways, back to the treble clef and the bass clef. We need to have an understanding of what notes are on the clef. And so there's a couple of devices, and they weren't created by me, so I apologize before if you don't like these acronyms. But there's a couple of devices that help people learn the G clef and the F clef. So down here we have something called lines and spaces. We've already discussed what lines and spaces are, but on the treble clef, if you want to learn what the lines are, there's a little device called Every Good Boy Does Fine, E, G, B, D, F. And for spaces, we have something called face, F-A-C-E. So if I zoom in here to the treble clef for you guys, we see this first line. If we go back to our device, every good boy does fine. Every is the first word. So this is an E. And if we look over here to where you start seeing these symbols on the page, these notes on the page, you can see that this is indeed an E, and it is on that line right there. We have good, which is the next lineup, which is right here, and that is a G. And if we come over here, we indeed see that there is a letter G underneath this note name. Boy, B, that is the third line. And if we come over here and we follow the third line, we can see that is indeed a B. Now the last two does fine, it continues the sequence. Does fine is now the fourth line. I don't have this written out past the letter C, but this would be a D. And then the last line, which is located right up here at the very top, is an F. For spaces, you start from the bottom space, right here, and that is going to be an F. Second space is going to be an A. Third is a C. And the fourth space is an E. We can see two of them here. Here's an F on the first space, and here's an A on the second space. Now on the bass clef, the F clef, we have another device, and I'm sorry that it just talks about boys. You can rewrite these. These are just some of the ways I was taught them how to learn the lines and spaces on the staff. But feel free to change this to any acronym that you like. But for lines, we have good boys deserve fine apples, and for spaces, all cows eat grass. So this functions just the same as the treble clef. G is the first line on the staff. So right here is a G. B is the second line on the staff, right there. D is the third line on the staff, which is right here, and we actually have a note on it right here, and it says D. F is the fourth line on the staff, right there, and you see we have a note on F. And the fifth line is an A, and here is an A. For spaces, just like the treble clef, you start from the bottom. The first one is an A. The second space is a C, which we have right here. The third space, 1, 2, 3, is an E, and the fourth space is a G. So always remember that there are 5 lines and there are 4 spaces. And just if you don't like every good boy does fine or good boys deserve fine apples, feel free to change the acronym. Just make sure that the first word is a G, second word starts with a B, D, F, A, and so on and so forth. But that is the basics of the treble and the bass clef, and where the notes are located on the clef. Just as an aside, we've mentioned middle C before and how the clefs are, and how the grand staff is joined together. Here we can see after B in the alphabet, we go to C, which is on a ledger line. And I did not discuss ledger lines in this video. I will discuss about them more later on, and you'll see in examples, and hopefully they'll become second nature to you. But here at middle C is where the treble clef on the grand staff will take over the bass clef. So here is the common point, and here is where the treble clef would start. So it starts C, then goes up all the way to the highest note that the instrument can play, which is pretty high. Ignore those lines. They're just supposed to be ledger lines, but that's a terrible. That's not how you should draw them. But anyways, that's middle C, and let's continue on here. We're getting close to the end of the lesson today, and I just have a few images that I want to share with you guys and websites that I found them off. This is a cool little diagram with another way of thinking about the acronyms for learning the treble clef and the bass clef. And this is from musicteachershelper.com. You see the face, which we talked about, and every good boy does fine, but here's 2 different ones for the bass clef. So for spaces, we have all cars eat gas, A, C, E, G, and then we have good burritos don't fall apart. So G, B, D, F, and A. And just for another example right here, I have the grand staff, and this has all the note names. And it's important to remember that when you get here and notes are up here on this staff, they are now on the treble clef, and they are not on the bass clef. So you can see that we start in the bass clef. It goes F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And this is where we exchange to the treble clef, because we do not want to go any higher in the bass clef on the grand staff. So we now are in treble clef, and we go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. And this note, we haven't talked about it, it's a G. That's it's not a ledger line, but it is off the staff. And like I mentioned with ledger lines, we will be talking about notes that exist off the staff in a subsequent video. But I really want you guys just to focus on these notes that are contained within the staff and know their order. So it's really important. It's very, very, very important that you learn this. So just again, for the bass clef, here's the spaces. A, C, E, and G. Here are the lines G, B, D, F, A. For the treble clef, here are the spaces F, A, C, E. And for the lines, we have E, G, B, D, and F. Remember, 4 spaces, 5 lines. So just to review what we talked about today, music theory, it allows us to explain music in a way that other musicians and composers understand. There are 2 important clefs that are used almost every day, treble clef and the bass clef. The 6 components of the staff or the stave that we've learned so far that are very important are lines and spaces, the clef itself, time signature, bar lines, and the key signature. And just real quick, we didn't, discuss how a time signature works or how a key signature works. We will, but you need to be able to, if I go back, identify, this is where the clef is located, this is where the key signature is located, and that's where the time signature is located. We also discussed the grand staff and how it is joined together by middle C. We discussed the musical alphabet and how it repeats. And so just here's another example. Like we start on C, we count 7, and then we're at the 8th one, we're back to C. So C, D, E, F, G. We start over, we go back to A, the beginning of the alphabet, A, B, and look, C, the first note we started on. The last thing we talked about were the letter names, and so this is for the treble clef, and this is for the bass clef. It's really hard to draw with a mouse. Ignore my really bad graphics. Maybe this one, this one looks better. Ignore that. This is the treble clef devices we talked about, and this is the bass clef devices we talked about. And like I said, you can change this to be whatever you want, but I learned that every good boy does fine for the lines, and F-A-C-E, face for the spaces for the treble clef. And for the bass clef, we have good boys deserve fine apples for the lines, and all cows eat grass for the spaces. So there's a couple of questions that I have for you to work on before the next video, and I want you to be able to answer these questions to the best of your ability before you continue on. If you have any questions, leave a comment in the YouTube video, or find my contact form on my website, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions via email. But the 6 questions I have for you are, what is music theory? What are the 2 most common clefs? We discussed the 3rd one in this video. Extra credit if you remember what it's called, but I need to know what the 2 most common clefs are. What is a staff? And by extension, what is the grand staff? We discussed many components of the staff. I want you to name at least 3 of them, and I would like you to also explain how would you describe these 3 components that you chose to someone how would you describe them to someone that didn't know anything about music? How would you put it in your own words to teach them this? True or false? There are only 7 primary letters in the musical alphabet. I need to know either it's true or it's false. And the last question deals with the bass clef. I want to know the letter names from the bottom of the staff to the top of the staff. I want to know the letter names for the lines and then the spaces. So if you can just list them out, that would be great. Anyways, that's the end of the presentation. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. This is, again, one of the first times I've done anything like this, and I'm kind of a little nervous. I hope you enjoy it. I'm also hoping that the more I do this, the more comfortable I get. I really enjoy music, and I really enjoy discussing it with other people. So hopefully you guys don't come back too negatively. I know there's a few pauses and a few times I had to think about something, but it's honestly because I'm super nervous. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the YouTube video itself or contact me via email. And again, my name is Davison Yon, and it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks.